Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, the game. So, recently I made a video on math and Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, and I had an absolute blast with that. I do mention the game in that video, but I wanted to give the game its own video. And here's how it's going to go. I'm going to talk about the game, starting with like the gameplay, and talk about how math is involved in that, as well as other things as we go on. So I'll use that the gameplay to kind of branch out and kind of like talk about things in the meta sense. And what's interesting about that gameplay is, it's an action game, first and foremost, right? And it's focused on lightsaber combat. So we're gonna get into it. But here's the thing: there is a co-op mode, and I'll talk about that a little. But one of the coolest things about the game is that it has a multiplayer mode where it's it's a fighting game. So it's treated as a mode, but it's like it's a game in and of itself, and that to me is fundamentally bonkers. And we're gonna get into it. So I'm gonna talk about all those things, and I'm gonna talk about my feelings on the game, and yeah, should be fun. And I would just assume spoilers ahead, spoilers for episode 3, the movie, in the game, as well as just all Star Wars if you're being extra careful. So just assume all the spoilers, but I probably will avoid most of them in this one. And I'll leave a link to in the description for my original Math and Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith movie video. All right, let's dig in. And remember, spoilers ahead, just to be safe. Okay, so like I mentioned, Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, the game, is an action game. And with the gameplay, while there are platforming elements, it is primarily an action game with a heavy focus on lightsaber combat. And I think that's cool. So as you go through the game, you're playing through the events of Episode 3. Some events have been modded, some include deleted scenes, and but largely it follows the same plot. And throughout, instead of a lot of cutscenes, they use footage from the movie, which I gotta imagine is cost effective. And yeah, so they take some interesting directions and spots, and we'll get into that a little later. So with the gameplay, you play as largely Anakin or Obi-Wan, and you alternate like back and forth between them as they navigate the story of Episode 3, which is fun. So there are levels, right? I mean, levels that you play through. There's like 17 levels, 17 missions, whatever you want to call them. But I mean, levels in terms of like, well, how is power displayed throughout the game? Well, you level up and you build up a certain amount of experience points, and you level up, and that's kept track of numerically. So there's math in that, and then you're accruing points, and that helps increase your stats, so to speak, right? Largely focused on offense and defense. You can increase your abilities as well, right? You can get more combos. You can increase your force powers. And there's math and all that, right? Because there's math in the health, there's math in the force gauge. They're visual representations of the math that's going on. But an idea is you're dishing out damage, you're trying to not take damage. And again, lightsaber combat is such a big part of this game, and there's math in all of that, right? So in terms of the gameplay, there's math and your inputs, right? It's heavily reliant on combos, right? Because you can go whack away, but you're probably not going to do as much unless you're doing some nice combos. And with those combos, there's math in that. There's math in how many hits are in a combo. There's math in how long you have to hold down the buttons in a combo. You might have to pause and go back in a combo, right? And there's math in that timing as well. And so there's that, and I think that's really cool. And then when it comes to like lightsabers in general, when you think about what's going on there, there's math in the motion, math in the physics, and with the characters themselves, there's biology and chemistry going on, and there's math in that too. And with the motions, yeah, there's physics in it, and there's math in that too. But there's also this element of choreography. There's this element of dance, of gymnastics, and there's math in all of that, right? Math in that motion, math in the patterns, math in just like everything that you're doing. So I think that's really cool. And so as you're going through the game, you're going to mission to mission. Like I said, it's 17 missions, and so someone had to decide that hey, we can cut up the story into 17 missions. And there's math in that, and there's math about like how long the missions will take you and what you do in those missions. There's math in the animation. There's math in like setting up the level. There's math in keeping the characters to scale in those levels. And again, it's very combat focused. So there's math in that. Now, like when you're going through, there is a certain percent of blaster fire that just gets deflected, which can increase over time, but there are like times where you can deflect the blaster fire if your timing is good with the lightsaber, and that's really cool. So that's the basics for the game. Like I said, it's very lightsaber intensive. There's combos. They also have these things called saber locks, and the idea is that your sabers meet, and you have to take some action to win that saber lock, which is reliant on how fast you're pressing a button, how fast you're inputting things, and the objective is for you to not take damage while also dishing out more damage. And if you're really good, you can get with it. So those are things to consider. There's math in the combat. There's math in like the level up, math in getting the experience points. Just math in how you distribute points when you level up. There's math behind the scenes. Like I said, there's math in the animation. There's math in the character design and world design and keeping things to scale. There's math in the coding. There's math in the budget for the game. There's math in using the scenes from the movie in the game and having that flow and transition. There's math all across the board because math is everywhere and in everything. Math is the force, and that's not a bad thing. And so that's like the main game. And I'm going to talk about my feelings overall in a second. It's more than a second. But I wanted to talk about the multiplayer mode and the co-op mode real quick. I'll start with the co-op mode because it's like there's not much to it. So throughout the game, there is an option to have a co-op mode where it's like it's you and another player or you and a computer controlled player. There's math in both of those. There's math in that human component, and math going into the AI component that assists you. And there's two of you either way. But that doesn't really interest me nearly as much as the multiplayer mode or the fighter mode, because here's the thing, right? It is a mode, sure, but it's its own game. They have I think a reasonable amount of characters and they're varied. So you have Anakin and Obi-Wan, of course, but you also have their future versions. You have Obi-Wan from A New Hope, and you have Darth Vader. And both of those latter characters fight and flow differently from Anakin and Obi-Wan from episode 3, and that's interesting, right? There's math in that. There's math in making them feel different. There's math in making them flow different. Math and the different combos they can do. But that's not all. You also have Mace Windu. You also have General Grievous. You have Dooku as well. Which is they're all good characters, right? You weirdly enough don't have Yoda, and you don't have Palpatine. And I don't know if that was just something in the development where they didn't know, or they just decided to skip things because like I don't think you really get a point in the game where you see them fighting, right? Because it's very Anakin and Obi-Wan centric, so you don't really get that whole hey Palpatine versus Yoda thing. It's kind of weird. So I guess like my theory is that they didn't have all the details going in, but who knows for sure. And I say that because there are some differences in the game, but we'll get to that too. But back to the fighting mode because it is interesting. So you have the characters that I mentioned, but you also have two characters in the game. One is called Sindralig, one is Sarah Kito. With Sindralig being Sarah Kito's master, and with Sindralig, it's basically that name is Nick Gallard, spelled backwards. And he was the stunt coordinator for the lightsaber fights throughout the prequels. So he did play the character. He's in the movie version of Episode 3, but where he's fighting Anakin, and it's in the hologram. And I'll get into some of the differences with that in particular as we go forward. So anyway, the fighting mode it's a little bit different because like for the main game you're playing this action adventure game, and there's platforming elements and lightsaber fight is there and it's all good, but it's a 3D platformer, or sorry, 3D action adventure with platforming elements, or however you want to call it. But when you get into the fighting mode, where again it's like this entirely different game, in a sense where it is its own thing, right? The gameplay is different. You still have all the cool lightsaber stuff and force powers, where you get to do your combos with the lightsabers. You get to do the force powers, and each character has a different way of fighting. But it's more restrictive in terms of movement, right? It's just like 2D fighting style, pretty much. And there's math in that, right? Because you're going from this 3D movement into this like sort of more 2D realm, and so you have less room to play around with. But that's a calculated decision, and each character pretty much have the same amount of health and energy, so it's kind of neutral in that sense. But they all have different ways of fighting, and they're all moving at different like speeds. So there's math in choosing to make it like this 2D fighter. There's math in the combos. There's math in the timing to do those combos and what you might have to hold. There's math in the different styles that each character is bringing to the table. And I brought up Anakin and Obi-Wan, and then like Obi-Wan from A New Hope, or old Obi-Wan, or classic Obi-Wan, and then like Vader. And I bring those up like again because I think it's so like notable to see the differences that can come with these types of people, like even with the characters that are supposed to be the same, but just like future versions of the ones that we see in Episode 3. And with Vader it's especially notable because with Anakin, he's very, very fast, and he's hard hitting. And with Vader, he moves a lot slower but a lot heavier. And it's worth noting that with the combos, you have light attacks, you have kind of mid-range attacks, which are considered the strong attacks in this game, and then you have like the heavy attacks, which I think in a lot of other games would be called the strong attacks, but here they're the critical attacks. Either way you slice it, there are advantages to using one over the other. Like with the light hits, you're not going to hit hard, but you're going to hit fast. With the strong hits, it's somewhere in the middle. Yeah, you're going to do more damage, but it is a bit slower. With the critical hits, you are moving much slower, but you're doing more damage. And there's also grappling to consider with that. And so like a lot of things kind of translated from that 3D environment in the main game to the 2D environment in the fighting game mode. And there's math in making it work in that context. And the idea is, you still have your health and your force or your energy, and you're keeping track of that while trying to beat the crap out of your opponent. And you can fight the computer, or you can give the controller to a friend or a relative, and you can play. And whether you're playing this fighting mode or the main game, there's a lot of math in it, as far as you, the player, is concerned, right? Because well, one, You bought the game, you put time into the game, but you're also doing the combos. So you're practicing the timing. You're building up experience as you play, and you're unlocking more. Right, you're unlocking more combos. You're unlocking more force powers, and you're using it to your advantage. And so there's a lot of math that goes into that, into you in for you inputting the controls into the controller and seeing how that plays out on the screen. And I think that's really cool because you're also just using math as you navigate these worlds. So with all that being said, and of course like the game takes money to make, and there's math in that too. But with all that being said, you know, I wanted to talk about how I feel about the game, right? Given what I said in the beginning, that I find it to be an underrated game, that's just, it's an underrated game of an awesome movie. Like, there was a period in time, and it still happens from time to time, where you had video game adaptations of movies, and now we're seeing more movie adaptations of video games and sometimes TV shows. But like back in, you had the movie tie-in games, and they were largely crap. It is what it is. I don't feel bad saying that, they were, but every now and then you would get a good one. And I actually think that Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, the game, is a good adaptation. Will it win any awards for graphics? No, but to me that wasn't the important part. The gameplay is pretty solid, not perfect, but really solid. And I appreciated the emphasis on lightsaber combat. I had a blast playing it. I actually replayed it within this last year, and it surprisingly holds up. Again, it's not going to win any award for graphics, but that was always true. It's still a fun game to play, and they give you plenty to do, plenty to unlock, because you're unlocking different. There's some bonus missions, so you're unlocking different missions. You're progressing through the game. You're also unlocking different characters that you can play in the fighting mode. And I just think that's really cool. And I did not regret my purchase back in the day, and I didn't have that copy anymore when I got it in recent times. But I didn't regret purchasing it again. It was a calculated decision, and it's I feel like it was time well spent. Episode 3 is one of my favorite Star Wars movies, and of the Star Wars games, the game version of Episode 3 is actually pretty high up there too. And I think that's worth mentioning. And I also think it's interesting to see how people scored it and why. Because a lot of people, whether they're using a star system or just coming right at you with the numbers, the idea is they are rating this, and there's math involved, and there's reasons for why these things happen. And for the record, with the star system, you normally get 5 stars or 10 stars, but the idea is you're still using math even if you don't specifically see the numbers, because it's well, what does this represent, right? And I think in this case it's interesting because while Episode 3, the movie, did get mixed reviews, it was largely considered relatively positive across the board. With the game, not so much. And I think that's worth mentioning. And because you'll get really low scores like a 4, but then you'll get really high scores like an 8. So different people had different reactions to it, and I think it's worth noting that on PS2 and Xbox you had a different experience than if you were playing it on the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS, or your phone. It was just crazy to think that they had a version of this game on the phone, but yeah, they did back in 2005. But you have a different experience because without getting into it too far, because I didn't play those versions, they are different. You have a 3D action game for the console versions with a fighting mode that again stands on its own, and it's a game which is really cool. Now with the 2D version, with the handheld versions, mobile version, it's 2D. Treated as a beat 'em up. Still an action game, but you're going and you're doing a side scrolling beat 'em up, and that's the idea there. So I think that's interesting because there's math in making all that work too. So it's really cool. That being said, Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith, the game, It is an underrated movie tie-in game slash adaptation of an awesome movie that I enjoyed and still enjoy to this day. It's fun. If you hadn't played it, I recommend it. If you can get over the graphics, which again won't win you any prizes or won't win that game any prizes, I think you'll find like a pretty enjoyable experience where it is lightsaber heavy. And, you gotta come with the combos. You have to manage that in the force powers. You gotta stay alive while dishing out the damage, and there is math in that, and that's really cool. So if you haven't played it, I do recommend it. If not, just to get a hold of that like fighting mode, because again, that stands on its own. Like it was really crazy. I wasn't expecting that when I got the game. I'm like, hey, this is really cool. They didn't have to go that extra mile, so I think that's cool. And I guess one other thing, or a few other things that I do want to mention now that I'm here and it's like coming to mind, is that they make some changes in the game. Like the thing with Syndralic, like I said, like he's actually in episode 3 in the hologram when Yoda and Obi-Wan see Anakin just like going through. In the movie, in the movies, we see him about to kill the kids, and then we see this projection where he is fighting grown Jedi, but we just don't see that much of that, and I think that's a shame. But in the game, they actually do have a mission where you're playing as Anakin and storming the temple, and you're fighting off the other Jedi. They skip the kid scene, which is good. Um, which it's like it's fine in the movie, I guess, but it's like not something that you'd want to play through. you know. So they have different scenes like that. They brought back Jocasta New. Yeah, that was cool. She was in episode 2. She was in the game for episode 3, but not in the movie. But they do stuff like that where they flesh some things out in some sense, or do things like a bit differently. There is an alternate ending, which is kind of cool, where Anakin jumps higher. He jumps higher than he did in episode 3, and finishes off Obi-Wan and all that stuff. And like I said in the beginning, there were spoilers, so I don't feel bad saying that. And if you played, and then he ends up betraying Palpatine too. So, and I think that was like pretty cool, because in the movie, it's like, okay, that Anakin is gonna lose, but after this amazing fight, at the end, Obi-Wan's like, oh, I have the high ground, da 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 da. But Anakin was a Jedi or a Sith at this point, and he could have jumped higher, or he could have jumped and not gone as far. He could have jumped to the side, left or right. He could have done a lot of different things, but he got arrogant and foolish, and just got messed up. He got bodied when he was putting Obi-Wan on the offensive for most of that fight. Which kudos on to Obi-Wan for like actually keeping it up. And I feel like that was an example of his prowess, because like dude was coming out almost an 8. But I do think that alternate ending is interesting though, because it's just like he went higher and he killed Obi-Wan, and realistically that's probably how that should have gone if he had been paying attention, or or rather he checked himself. But overall, I like the game and I like the movie, because the movie, there's so much action in it, and I think like the game does a good job of getting that action across. And there's a lot of lightsaber combat, like I said, and I'm big on lightsabers. If you've seen some of my videos, But with that in mind, again, like I enjoyed the movie, I enjoyed the game, I enjoyed fighting. Anakin is Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan is Anakin. Both were fun. And I enjoyed that in the game, but I enjoyed seeing Obi-Wan versus Anakin in the movie, and I enjoyed the other lightsaber fights too. So it's all good stuff. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Professor Prime out.